Esther, who have we got this time?
Amal Awad, talking about ideas.
Oh, that's a good idea. I'm putting some lipstick on for the interview would be a good idea too.
So, welcome to Running Free Skills. Today we are talking about ideas, where they come from, how to have them, how to decide which ones are worth following and what form they should take. To help us untangle our brains is the amazing and inspiring Amal Awad. She's a journalist, screenwriter, author and performer. She's written fiction and non-fiction, has 2 more books coming out over the year or so, has a TV series and a film in development, and is running a podcast. So she's clearly lazing around and watching Netflix in her gym jams. Hi, Amal. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Now, do you want to give me, just give me an overview of your career and perhaps tell me a bit about what really inspires you?
Well, I actually have a law degree and I practiced very, very briefly. And I kind of knew very quickly that it wasn't really going to be my life path. And so I got into editing from there, sub-editing from there, journalism. So I take the really scenic route to get where I want to go. I guess I've just always loved words. I've always been one of those people who's got her head in a book. I watch television shows and movies and kind of study them. Like it's not something that I just take in. I'm always paying attention. And if something stays with me for a while, I tend to wonder about it, about why, and sort of the power of story has just grown for me over the years. So for me, it's whether it's through radio, a TV series, a movie or a book, I'm always trying to unpack stories in a way that appeals to a certain audience, I suppose, or speaks to a particular issue. And it's just been a graduation of things for me. So I kind of hopped around a lot in journalism, mainly trade. So I was speaking to particular industries, which is really great. It's a really great way to understand how to harness a certain, voice or really speak to a particular demographic. Trade journalism is great. So if people are trying to get into journalism, I would highly recommend doing trade where you're, dealing in a particular industry, whether it's finance or property, or even I did pharmacy. I've done everything. And then, mainstream journalism is obviously going through massive change. Most of my mainstream journalism, I have feature writing skills, but also columns. I've written a lot of op-eds and confessionals. I've written for journals. I think this is just sort of going to show that there's really no limit to what you can do with your capacity as a storyteller. It's all about exploration, finding different ways to use your voice. So that's what I've been doing. And my foray into books was through self-published, actually. It was years later that I picked up an agent. And then from there, I finally had access to, publishing deals. And Penguin Random House published 2 of my nonfiction books. And then the next 2 books are with different publishers. And that's sort of all next year at this stage because of what's happening. So that's me in a nutshell. Sorry, I should be brief, but I don't know how to summarize my career. It's years and years. It's like more than a decade of journalism and storytelling.
And I think that's why we've got you here, though, is because you've had such a long period of honing ideas and working with ideas. So I have ideas running through my head all the time, and I can only imagine that your brain must be like a super highway. And some ideas are kind of regular visitors, some are fleeting guests, and I don't think I'm unusual in this. I think so many people, both within our industries and just in the world actually in general, are like this. But there aren't many of us who've been able to turn those ideas into the prolific and successful work that you've done. So tell me about how your brain works. Do ideas come into your brain all the time, or do you sit down with the specific goal of coming up with an idea?
The only time I think I've really sat down with a sort of specific goal is when I'm briefed. So in journalism, you have to do that. You have to come up, especially for radio where it's 24/7, it's a news cycle, you have to come up with ideas constantly. So that is a bit of a challenge sometimes. But you learn to spot what's necessary for those ideas. When it comes to my creative work, so my non-fiction or my fiction books, my screenplays, and even sort of improv theatre and all those things that I've sort of dabbled in, I would say no, I never operate on I'm going to sit down today and try to drum up some ideas. What I might do is I think ideas are really essentially, you could break them down into a few things. They are usually questions that you're asking about something. They're observations, or their solutions to a problem. That's generally what an idea is. So, some genius invention, it's a solution to something, right? Somebody couldn't get something done and then they thought, what we need right now, it's this. Storytelling is really similar. It's usually, sometimes it's an observation. You've noticed something and either it sparks an immediate instant sort of thought about, that's a really interesting thing that just happened and blah, blah, blah. And then you start asking questions. What if this happened? Or what if that happened? Another place, obviously, of inspiration is just your own story, your own life will plant a lot of seeds. And, there's that really overwrought saying, it's overused, write what you know. And what that really means is write what you have access to, what you have an understanding of or an appreciation for. I don't recommend going for things you're passionate about. I think the key is to be interested in something, to have a fascination with it. So, I'm really deeply interested in divination. It shows up a lot in my stories because I'm always trying to understand human behavior and why we need answers or seek answers to certain things, why we're never satisfied when they come. They're the kinds of things that occupy my mind a lot. So the ideas really, they should come from some place that feels natural for you. It's a place where you are asking a question of something. You don't have to have an answer. That's not the point of it. It's because you don't have the answer. And often ideas, I feel like so many ideas are just one line. They're just something you write down one day randomly. Like, what if this happened? Or what if that happened? Or what if I had said yes to that instead of no? Or what if this person did this instead of that? And you might even forget about it. And then one day you come back to it. And that's happened to me quite a lot of times. Like, I have parked an idea. I kind of thought, no, it doesn't have legs. It doesn't have any juice to it. And then one day it does. One day it's like the perfect thing for me to be working on. And the best example is my next novel is something that has been stewing in my mind for about 8 years on and off. And I honestly had no expectation that I was going to write it. I just kept rejecting it. I was like, I'm not going to write that book. Why would I write it? I even went and wrote another novel to avoid writing that one. Because I was like, I've moved beyond this series. I'm not going to write this book. It's actually the unofficial third book in a series. And it was so different in tone. I thought, I can't make it a series. I have to write something totally different. And yet it just wasn't quite working. And what I ended up doing was chopping up that other novel into short stories and microfiction. So the stories, the ideas were there. So ideas are like almost ingredients, really, I think. Ideas, characters, stories, dialogue, it's all like the ingredients. And you might have a certain recipe in mind and then you make it and it tastes terrible. So you have to actually just reuse those ingredients and save them and save the day. That's kind of what I think of ideas. They're just a big melting pot and you can stir them and mix them up to your particular perspective and liking. And I think that's what your job is as a storyteller. It's to decide how to bring these ideas into form in a way that is unique to you, that lends your perspective and insight, really, because that's what you're doing as a writer. You're shining a light on something and giving it a very particular perspective, because the same story will not sound the same through another person's voice.
Do you know what I really love about that is it reminds me that the idea is kind of such a small part, and then the work that the storyteller puts in to craft it into something that can be consumed by other people is actually the hard work. It's actually the big part of it.
Yeah, and also just to not get caught up in the genius of an idea. I think we have a lot of expectation that this idea is divinely inspired, and so it's perfect. It's arrived perfectly on my lap, and it's meant for me. The stork delivered it and nobody can tamper with it. Your idea is going to change 100 times before it's anything of what it should be. And I don't know why ideas come a certain way. They don't arrive perfectly formed. Probably because it would rob you of the journey that you have to go on as a storyteller. And I mean, for example, with my novels, I'm very much, and even my screenplays, I should say, I'm a character writer. So ideas that come to me as a story are much harder for me to get into than ideas that come to me through a character. So when I have a character, I'm much better at finding out what the story is through them. They tell me what the story is. Whereas when I have an idea and I can sit on it for years because I don't know who the characters are. So it's almost like showing up to the most beautiful hall and there are no guests. That's how it feels to me. And just to sort of make that point, like, that idea of ideas zooming around in my head. Absolutely. I'm a very fidgety person, and most people who know me would say that I think very fast. Like when I'm excited, I'm a fast thinker. But that doesn't mean I don't sit in things for ages. I sit in them for ages. And that's why I get fast, because it's like suddenly I've had all this brew time and now I'm ready. I'm like, I'm ready to go. And I think everybody's got ideas coming to them a lot. It's just a question of, it's no harm, no foul if it's not for you. Some people aren't storytellers in that way. They will be a storyteller in another way. I mean, I think we're mainly creative people, like whether it's anything you're doing, it doesn't matter what you're doing. It's a creative form. You are creating something. So for me, my love is story. For other people, it's creating something of use to people that isn't so, I guess, vague as an output. It's much more, you can identify what it is, and this is simply blah, blah, blah. There's no opinion. You don't get rated on Rotten Tomatoes. It's not. Ideas are very different in the storytelling world. They're very personal.
Yeah, it's true. Now, I've got all these hundreds of ideas floating around my head. Should I write them down? How do you do it? Do you have a special ideas book? Do you just write on pieces of scrap paper, or do you not write them down?
No, I write everything down. I will forget otherwise. Don't ever think that you're going to remember something, especially, oh God, if you wake up at 3 a.m. and you have some idea, even if it's in your mind, in your drowsy state, not necessarily fully formed or even coherent, write it down, because I promise you in the morning, it's going to be like a dream. You're just going to really try to make sense of it, and it won't make any sense. How is really up to the person. I use Evernote for a lot of things. I swear by Evernote. I think that it's what's handy about Evernote is, and just to explain, what Evernote is, it's that app. It's on, you can have it on your laptop, but you can also have it on your phone. And basically it just allows you to create folders, paste things in, make notes, itemize, tag, whatever you want. So all of my books, for example, have their own folders. Every project I do has an Evernote folder, and I work through that. My book, Fridays with My Folks, has at the front of every chapter a very personal reflection. So Fridays with My Folks. I wrote most of those on my phone and then fixed them up when I actually sat down to write the book properly. That wasn't intentional. It was the way I wrote those reflections. I wouldn't recommend writing a novel on your phone. Like Fridays is nonfiction. It was a bit different. So they were like almost like diary entries. I do keep notebooks as well. So if you're driving, for example, and the muse arrives, you cannot sit there on your phone. One thing I've also taken to doing is using voice recorders on your phone to just sometimes, if the idea is really coming out very quickly and you don't want to be sitting there fumbling, typing, just Otter is really good. It transcribes what you're saying. So if you speak clearly enough, you don't have to rewrite it. It's just little hacks that I've discovered over recent times that help me save a bit of time. But absolutely, I think that the only caution the one word of caution I would say is be really careful of very scattered notebooks and things that are really hard to come back to, because I have had that problem where I've written things and I can't remember where I put them. That's why I like Evernote now, because I can easily find things in Evernote. I can search, whereas I can't search a notebook. Like I'm kind of screwed if I wrote down my great idea in notebook number 3 years ago. I don't know where it is now. I still have them, but who's going to sit there going through But yeah, I'm a big fan of, the other reason why I think it's good to write something down is it helps you to understand what you're trying to do in that moment. So you start to formulate as you write, and you're kind of like, I know this isn't quite right yet, but this is just a place to start. And I tell you, when I was young, when I was a little girl, I was a library monitor, which obviously says everything. Yes. And I, as a gift, our librarian took me and some other kids to see Roald Dahl. And yeah, and you know, I was very young. I didn't think to get his autograph at the time, which I regret to this day. But anyway, one thing I always remembered from that talk was he said, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory started from one line about a boy going to visit a chocolate factory or something like that. And so it's one of the greatest books of all time. It's so popular to this day. It's an enduring classic. And I think it's just, I always remembered that Roald Dahl had this notebook that he just wrote down one line sort of ideas. So that kind of really inspired me as an adult. And I think that's just a great place to start.
Tell me about how you expand that idea. So you've got your Roald Dahl one-liner, you've got your one-liner, I've got my one-liner, one word, whatever it is. How do you then expand that to know to know what that idea is?
Try to pitch it. That's the best way to figure out if you have anything, if you know what you're doing. You know,
my goodness, that's genius.
That's just, it's going to tell you really quickly if you know what you're trying to do. So, and the reason why I say that is because a million times I've thought I've had the best idea. And then when I'm like, okay, what is it? I don't know. There's a thing and this happens, and then it's not an idea. It's a thought. It's, you know, the idea is your seed. You have to water it and plant, you know, when you've planted that seed, you have to water it until it starts to give you some ideas about what it's going to look like. And that was a really bad metaphor, but you know what I'm trying to say. I hate COVID. Okay. I've been indoors too long. So the best way to do it is, imagine you were trying to, or even try to pitch it to someone you know, who you trust. You know, you don't want to be throwing your ideas around too early. That's the other thing I would say. I guard my ideas pretty closely, not because I'm afraid people will steal them, but because I just feel like I'm a bit woo-woo, and I think they're very energetic forms, you know, these ideas. I think you've chosen it and it's chosen you in some way. And if you start spreading it too thin, it loses its excitement for you, I think. And that's happened to me before, where I get excited about an idea, I talk about it, and then it falls flat after that. I've used up all my energy talking about it. So you've got to get into the doing very quickly. So pitch. All right, what's the story? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Like, what do you think what is really the essence of this? And then you're going to be breaking that down 100 times over, because, you know, there's the external world of what's happening here, the cosmetic pitch, and then there's the journey of what your characters are going to go on, or what your story is. And that's nonfiction as well. So, you know, when I pitch nonfiction, I'm always trying to be catchy with the title, but I'm really trying to say more very briefly and explain to them what I'm really trying to get to. And then be open to wonder, I think, is a really important one. When you're trying to work with your ideas, it's almost like you're having a conversation with your idea, to sort of say, okay, I like what you're showing me so far, but let's see what else there is to play with here. And that's really, it's just a matter of time. You have to be really patient with your ideas. You have to sit there sometimes. I mean, sometimes ideas are just going to come, and honestly, it'll be so easy to write that pitch. So the example I would give is Beyond Veiled Cliches, my book about Arab women. I wanted to do a radio program. So that was actually an idea that I had because somebody had mentioned a funding program and, you know, have you got any ideas? And I was like, well, not really. And that was one of those journalism-based things where I was like, well, let me think of one. And so I thought, well, I'd love to hear from Arab women, being one myself. And it just wasn't going anywhere as an idea for audio. I just couldn't get the support I wanted. I just couldn't see it working. And then I thought, wait a second, I'm a journalist. Why didn't I write this? And so see what I mean? It was just sitting with it, giving it a bit of room. And the name came to me literally in the shower. Like, I remember thinking I had a terrible name for it. It was something like I knew I wanted to go to the Middle East and interview women here as well. And I was like here and there or some crap like that. I don't know. It was terrible. And my agent very diplomatically said, yeah, we need a title, but this is a great pitch. And so I just sat down, and in an hour, I just vomited out this pitch. It was just so, like, it was lucky. It was just one of those moments where years and years of knowledge came into that one thing. Whereas with a novel, I find that a little bit harder. I find it a lot harder to sit down and just download a synopsis. It takes me quite a while. It takes me the entire book to find out what it's about, really. And I always think, and this is something a lot of storytellers will say, and I swear by it, and I'm sure that anybody who's aspiring or is in it already knows, whatever you think your story is, it's not. It's going to end up being something not totally different, but it's going to surprise you. That's when you know you're onto something, when you think you've got a handle on it and it just keeps taking you on these twists and turns. I don't mean plot twists. I mean, it's an emotional deep dive. You're writing, whatever you're writing should matter to you for it to be great, I think, or even for it to be substandard. Like, it's just care about what you're writing about, and it will be a lot easier to sit down at the desk and do it, I think.
You talked very briefly about an idea starting off as one thing, a radio piece, and ending up as a book. Does that happen to you a lot? And how do people decide what format an idea should take?
Yeah, look, I don't know if it happens. I don't know if it happens a lot. I still got some radio pieces out of that experience as well, interestingly. I think what you've got to look at is more, what is my ideal format for this and why? And in my case, what I wanted for radio was to hear women's voices. I actually wanted their intonation, the voices to really come through. I was listening to a lot of podcasts at the time. And I guess my concern was, as a book, it would fall a bit heavier. It's very hard to capture someone's essence on the page. Well, not their essence, it's more just, it's not as rich an experience sometimes. If you hear a person's voice or see them, even those are different experiences, right? And I thought radio is great because people feel comfortable talking into a microphone where there's no camera. A camera changes everything. So I was very comfortable with the idea of having these voices as either written or audio, because I thought that's going to help. But in terms of the flexibility needed, I would say, for example, that example I gave before of the novel, where I wrote this entire novel and something just wasn't working. And yet I still wrote the book, and yet I understood what I was trying to get to, but it was a destination that frankly just wasn't worth visiting in the end. It was sort of like, okay, what do I do? So from there, what it actually allowed me to do was pull apart what I was trying to achieve. It's like, I understand what I was trying to do with this storyline, and I understand what I was trying to do with that storyline. And so what it actually allowed me to do was start writing short stories, because I'd never done that before. So sometimes accidents as well, or mistakes, or things that in your mind seem like a failure, are actually really great ways to understand your craft better and to try new things. So I would say it's really important to have an idea of what you think it will suit, because that helps you to hone your pitch. Why radio, for example? I was really specific in my mind of how it would work. This is how long the episodes will be. I was doing radio at the time at ABC, so I had a really good handle on it. But for some reason, it just wasn't meant to be that. And similarly, a non-fiction book, they are structurally really challenging, especially my ones always had a personal thread with about 60 to 80 interviews that I had to incorporate into the book. So it was a structural nightmare, but the pitch was always the thing I went back to. What was I trying to achieve here? And, doesn't matter how much I swerved away from that, I always came back to that. So the format, you don't want to be playing around with it once you've committed too much, I think, because so for example, the novel, it still stayed fiction. I just changed the format slightly. The book about Arab women, it was still their voices, but I chose to write it instead of focusing on radio. So it was just, the essence was still intact, if that makes sense.
Format, or how do you change the format of an idea, and what formats are available?
So it really just depends on what the story is, or what the person's idea is. If it's already completed and it was, for example, a series of radio interviews, let's say, and then all of a sudden the capacity to put those on air is no longer there. You could easily release those yourself online. The problem with that, of course, is to get the same audience is going to be a challenge. So if you have the option of providing the audio with a written version of that, something that is written to support it, that's when I'd be pitching to a major paper or whatever. See, it just depends on the idea as well. So like, who's the audience for this? There is a lot of capacity still. I think the issue is more, what are your expectations in terms of payment, for example? So it's no secret that the arts are a mess right now in terms of funding. So many organizations have lost 4-year funding that they had been counting on. Most of us are not making any money right now. So we are absolutely relying on ideas that are already in existence. I completely understand why nobody would be motivated in some ways to actually start something new. I would argue that everything is still going to have value eventually. And so I think the best thing to do is also have an honest conversation with the person who you originally took this idea to, who commissioned it, and say, is this something that is still going to work right now? Or is it something that needs to be delayed? And I know that that's been my situation. I know that other people have had to look at what's coming out right now, because the mood out there isn't great. So if you think your idea was better suited to an optimistic time, I wouldn't be bringing it out right now. Personally, I would just be sucking it up and saying, okay, this sucks, this is terrible, but I'm going to make sure that this idea gets its best chance at life. If it's something you're still in the process of, I would just keep going. I wouldn't be abandoning ship right now, unless your idea is just something that is so impossible right now that I just can't see anything being like that. But honestly, now is absolutely the time. We are stuck. We're all sort of in glue right now, really trying to move, and we're kind of like unable to get where we want to go. It's kind of the best time to really test your dedication to your ideas. So many of us have ideas that swim around in our heads and stay there. We love our ideas. We talk about them with passion and gusto, but actually getting them done, not so much. And I know that it's a problem for people because they're too afraid to start. You know, I just interviewed Yumi Steins for my podcast, and we were talking about that very idea that it can be really intimidating to look at a project and not know if it's going to have a home at the end of the day. And so it puts a lot of people off. They won't even try. And I get that, but I wrote a novel having no publisher, and it did set me on my career path. It was still a long career path, but it's still, if I hadn't invested in courting Samira, my first novel, and at the time the GFC happened, by the way, so I lost a publishing deal. So I'm familiar with this, you know, it's not unusual for me. If I hadn't have written that, I wouldn't have had a book to give to Sarah McDonald, who I met at a radio program one day, who then said to me, I loved your book. I think you should write for Daily Life. And then from Daily Life, I got another job, and then my book started to sell really well. So I think you should never underestimate what will get you where you need to go. You have to have a sort of openness to the process and really a fierce dedication to bringing your ideas to life, but not in a very, be open to how those ideas come to life. Be open to changes, be flexible. You have to, you can't sort of, unless it's, you know, you're making a chocolate bar. I don't know. You're making a chocolate bar. That's it. You're not going to suddenly go, oh, I'm going to make a cake now. You know, you're just going to get confused. But you might change the flavors. You might realize that, okay, I don't want to make 6 pieces. I'm on fire today with the metaphors, by the way. I'm just saying that this is no reflection on my writing. I'm just trying to simplify it, that there's a certain element of flexibility that's absolutely necessary, and to be less precious when it comes to having ideas. Everybody has great ideas. The difference is, are you someone who will actually put the effort in despite the odds to get it over the line? That's what's going to make you successful at the end of the day. And when I say successful, that's also open to interpretation, because is publication success? Is it winning awards? Is it bestseller lists? I don't know. It's up to you to decide what your version of success is as well.
Absolutely it is. And I suspect that view of success changes throughout our lives. You know, what was really important to me at high school was winning awards. Like, I wanted to be top of the class. Now, you know, I have totally different, it's a much more internal level of success. I finish a project and I'm like, oh, I feel really proud of that. That's great.
It's great if you can be that way, yes. It's great. Most people I know were just all tragic, but yes, it's great. It's internal happiness. It's all about that.
Now, at the flip side of this,
yes.
When do I let an idea go? At which point do you just have to consign an idea to the great ideas graveyard in the sky?
I am a big believer in your gut steering you true. I think a lot of the time we know deep down when something's not working. Not even sometimes deep down. Sometimes it's right there on the surface, waving at you, telling you this idea is terrible or it's not working, or what you think it is, it isn't, you know. And I think you've really got to have those honest check-ins. But ask questions, write it down, have a dialogue with someone who you trust as well, and say, look, I don't know why this isn't quite working. I do that all the time. Like, your ideas don't arrive fresh and looking amazing. I mean, look at, you know, I'm going to use one of my amazing metaphors here, but the kitchen, right? You go into a kitchen, it's frantic, but when they bring out the dish for you, the dinner table, whatever, and it just looks perfect and beautiful, like it's been created in heaven. And it's not. It's hell for the chefs back there. That's what storytelling is. It's not a dream job. It's a really challenging job. I'm always amused or fascinated when writers talk about how much they love writing, because most people I know hate it, but they can't not do it, you know? So it's one of those things where you've got to get realistic about what writing is going to feel like. It's going to feel really hard. And that means asking hard questions of yourself and saying, okay, I know what I was trying to achieve when I set out on this particular idea, but it's not quite right. Why is it? And often it's because you're really stuck on one thing. You're like, that one line, I refuse to let it go. That saying, kill your darlings. There's a reason. You have to sometimes let go of what you thought it was in order for it to be what it needs to be. And I actually don't think it's that complicated. I think there are other things though, where like you might have done something and you're very happy with it, but you're not getting the response you want. You should pay attention to that. It doesn't mean they're right, but it means that you're not landing it with people. And so you've got to ask yourself, how important is it to you to get the idea out in that form as you want it exactly, because you think it's exactly right and everyone else is telling you it's not working. Doesn't mean they're right, but maybe the time isn't right for that. And what happens a lot is, it does happen where if you're the first person into an idea, if you're the first person if you're innovative and you're bringing out a book on something that hasn't been done yet, it's very unlikely you're going to be the person who breaks ground on that. Other people will suddenly come in after you and they'll be the ones who are like getting all the accolades and everything. And you're kind of like, but I wrote that 5 years ago. You know, like it happens all the time. So openness, flexibility, and being thick-skinned in a way where you are open to constructive criticism, and that is also like self-criticism. So, all right. So for me, it's always that there's a particular scene I love. And if I can't get rid of that scene, it's so important to me. And that's the problem. It's so important to me, but not my characters. It's bogging down the story. And so that's where you are stepping in, and you're you're trying to orchestrate events where really, especially with fiction, your characters are going to orchestrate events, not you. And you've got to pay attention to what they're telling you. With nonfiction, that's just also the same idea of like, by the end of the process, you just don't really get as precious about things by the final copy edit or final page edit, when they're like, we're just not sure if this is fine. Okay, just delete it. I don't want to look at this again. Just delete the entire chapter. That's kind of what it gets. It gets to that point. You won't always be precious about your ideas. So give it time as well to sort of really tell you if it's necessary, if it's really serving the story.
Now, thinking about the people who are watching this, what kind of, they should finish watching this. We'd like you to stay to the end. We love you being here. But what should they do to kind of stock take their ideas? What are the first 3 things they should do straight after watching this? I
would absolutely do a stock take. So yeah, put together a list of the things that straight away come to your mind of the things that you thought of even 5 years ago. It doesn't matter. I think what's really important is to feel excitement towards something. Doesn't mean you won't be afraid of it. It doesn't mean that it won't make you feel a bit nervous or uncertain, but it's sort of like, this isn't hard for me to think about. I really want to think about it. And also it's just coming back into my mind all the time. So that would be the first thing. I would take a look at things and just start playing. For me, it's sometimes it's almost like a playtime of like, let's just see if I'll, the novel got revived because I just couldn't stop thinking about it one day. And it was like, I'm just going to go back to the things I wrote 5 or 6 years ago and see if there's anything in there. And of course, half of it was crap and it was fine. But then there was half of it that was actually like, it's not that bad. Actually, maybe I've got something. And then I did actually have something with it. So it's sometimes just curiosity and I'm just going to have a play. I'm just going to see if this means anything and if it can come to life. And sometimes I think, and this can't be underestimated, luck and destiny play a part, okay? Sometimes you're thinking of something and then a conversation happens where somebody brings something up and it just so happens that it matches something you're thinking about. And then I'm not saying count on that because that's not going to happen with everything. It really doesn't. Luck comes, I think, from your effort. But I think it's really important to be curious about your own ideas. Don't treat them like that they're a given idea. Look at them with interest and fascination and go, why did you land here with me right now? And what can I do for you? And once you start to do that, it sort of opens up this world of possibility and it just starts to sort of spiral. And that's what creativity is. It's a spiral. It's not meant to be going from one end to the other. You're meant to be going up and down. You know what I mean? And just sort of spiraling up to see things from a new perspective. That's what creativity is. So I think if you can engage with your ideas, that's the best approach to take. And then just don't put expectations on yourself. I think a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves I say it because I do it myself. It's like you get to the point where time feels so precious that you don't want to waste time. That's, it's how we talk. I can't waste time on that. That's not going to go anywhere. But some of the stuff that I've enjoyed writing the most didn't end up anywhere. It just, some of the stuff that got published and got the best praise was some of the stuff I least enjoyed writing. It didn't mean I didn't enjoy it, but it wasn't like the thing that made me think this is amazing. This is the best thing I've ever written, So just have a play, be curious.
Excellent. Oh, Amal, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and inspiration with us. So ideas stock take, get everything down on paper, start having a think about them, see what excites you, see what interests you, and then just start writing, start working. And that's any idea, any project, anything you want to do that's creative.
So if you'd like to learn more about creativity and actually doing the thing, our next session is with the co-creator of Right Brain Workout, Alex Waddleton. So thank you, Amal, for joining me, and thank you to ACMI for their support in putting these workshops out, and see you next time on Running Free Skills.